Hi and welcome everybody to this webinar with Jonathan Fink. Absolutely delightful to meet you. Haven't met Jonathan before, haven't been doing this kind of webinar before, but I was really interested to host it because what I loved is maximizing content ROI at scale. And what I was terribly interested was at scale. So a little bit of housekeeping beforehand. If you have any questions, please do put them into the chat. We'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. Jonathan obviously will answer more than I will because he really knows the topic. Please also remember that this will be available afterwards, so you can watch it again on YouTube after the event. So don't worry if you missed something. Don't ask a question that we've already answered. Just watch it again afterwards. But try and think up some interesting questions that you'd really like to get the answer from Jonathan. Because from what I understand, Jonathan, you're going to tell me now you know boatloads about content,
I know all the
making it pay. Brilliant. Well, I mean, the thing about content is knowing a lot about content is one thing. Knowing how to make it pay is another. And making it pay at scale is a third thing. And you know them all. Please do tell us.
I will do. And to add another layer of challenge in there, I also know how to make it work across markets and multilingual as well. So,
well, I saw that. That's incredibly interesting. I mean, the idea kind of that we make this content, obviously kind of within one market, that's fine. We want to make it pay for itself. We want to make it scalable. And the big problem is then international and different languages and so on and so forth. And phenomenally interesting. You work for, or you work with Greenpark, and you're the head of search and innovation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So Greenpark content has grown extraordinary. It's only 4 years old, and it's grown off the back of an individual project for a large brand, which was to create a multi-market content hub. Since then, it's expanded out to do all sorts of content production. But I would say unusually, unlike a lot of agencies that are like production houses, where they're really focused on, production outputs and quality of the visuals and this sort of stuff, but not really focused on performance. We're very different. We try to blend, economical content output with incredibly high production standards, but every single asset is fine-tuned to perform in Google. So I would say it's performance-driven content. That's the entire USP of what we do.
That's brilliant. I mean, performance-driven content, I think kind of a lot of us create content in the hope that maybe it will be worthwhile for us at the end of the day. Making sure that it is actually performance-driven is an incredible skill. You've got a special talent. In fact, you've got multiple special talents, because not only does it pay for itself, but it's at scale, and it's international, and it's multilingual.
Absolutely. You'll know one of the real challenges when dealing with any brand at all is they will say, how much, how fast, what's this going to do for me? They want projections. They want to know where they're going to be in month 3, month 6, and they're going to want that translated into ROI, which their stakeholders can actually appreciate. So it could be signups, it could be purchases. There's not that many sites that actually have e-commerce directly on there, or it could be in terms of traffic, share of voice, cookies captured that they can then reuse in paid media. So there are a number of different ways to actually model the ROI and the monetization, from the very simple to the more complex. What we try to do with clients is take them on a journey. So if they don't know what their KPIs ought to be, or if they just come to us and say, well, we want to be on page 1, or we want 5 squillion, users to visit our site in the first month, we will try and translate that into achievable and much more meaningful KPIs. We'll even, dare I say it, try to look at user engagement, loyalty, repeat visits. We'll even take it beyond what traditional SEO will tend to concern itself with.
Which is a beautiful way to segue into the presentation itself. Now, really quick, let's switch to the presentation screen so that Jonathan can start. We can get into the meat of this webinar. Please do remember, the audience, people who are watching, do ask questions. Jonathan wants to answer them. I want to hear them because, I mean, I've got lots of questions, but I'd rather hear yours. I'm controlling the screen. Some of the formatting, like webinar, for example, the top left-hand corner might not be perfect because I just uploaded it. And Jonathan is going to take it away. Thank you.
Fantastic. So this is all about maximizing content at scale, which is the real challenge that we're going to talk about. And it's not an easy thing to do. I would even say that at Greenpark, even though we do tons of this and we have 4 years of heritage behind us, it's still a work in progress because Google's algorithm is changing, Google's requirements changing. We'll all know that things like Lighthouse 6, light speed, technical benchmarks that Google is setting are continuously changing, the bars that we have to jump across. Some of you will also be aware that the latest iteration of Google Analytics is much more user engagement focused in its metrics than it is focused on sessions. So again, this whole landscape is changing, and how we measure success and what signals we need to give out to Google for our content to perform, that's all changing all the time. So let's have a peek at the first slide here. So the main agenda here is going to be how we create high performance content at scale, how we successfully cut through the huge amount of noise that we have in any given category, and how you do that across multiple markets is another juggling trick, I would say. I mean, this will be familiar to most people who are on the call agency side, but it'll ring a bell with brands too, and that is, your ambitions are always bigger than your budget. So when producing content, we will try to see what is the most efficient way to create that content at scale while still retaining some kind of authenticity, let's say, and making that content compelling. And that's an incredibly difficult juggling act. Next, we're going to look at the business cases for content. This slide is just a bragging piece, really. This is to show some of the sites I've worked with over the years, not just Greenpark. This is from a variety of different agencies that I've worked with here. Many of these agencies over the years, clients rather, have delivered performance through content, and many of them have been experimenting, I would say, with content, but not at scale. And I think one of the things that I've really learned over the years is you can't come at this and just throw a couple of articles out there and then not do it as part of a sustainable sort of process. You have to have high ambition, you have to plan strategically, and you have to follow through on that ambition rather than just sort of tinkering it and getting cold feet after a month or two. So why is it so important to create not just content that is got keywords, stuffed into it? It's important to create content that's compelling, and that's because there's this syndrome. I mean, we've coined this term. Hopefully, it'll take off. Content fatigue, and that is where people are bombarded with content, but a lot of it, a high proportion of it, is low grade, low quality, and frankly, not very engaging. And I would say many brands across the world are guilty of just pumping out content. Much of it is internally focused. It's all about their sort of brand and their internal dialogue, and it's not really aligned with what users are actually interested in. So 90% of the world's data, and that includes sort of content, was just created in the last 2 years. And that's quite a scary statistic there. But you can see why, the content cholesterol is a condition that we're trying to overcome. So how do we create cutting edge content that's really going to work? So first of all, we need to get away from methods that are manual and inefficient. And one of the first things to note here is that you can't just sort of create content ad hoc and just sit down every month, think up a few keywords that you haven't covered before, and just hope it works like sort of throwing spaghetti at a wall. That's not going to do anything. You need to have a proper piece of keyword research. You need to build a taxonomy, dare I say, which is a way of mapping all the language that's important to your consumers, or if you're B2B to your end clients, and you need to have a systematic plan for how you're going to follow through on that. Now that plan may be executed over the space of 6 to 9 months. It may be a year. It may be a 5-year plan that you have to capture your category, but you've got to have that sort of, I would say, that planning at scale for it to have a chance of working. Also, if you look at the more traditional methods of sort of creating content, they tend to underperform because they don't match the keyword choices to the maturity of their domain, for instance. So they'll quite try to go for keywords that are too competitive. They won't necessarily build in a strong structure to their website. They won't have strong user experience, and their content will become sort of just a little silo of overambitious keywords somewhere on the site, which people forget about. So creating content at scale is about combining kind of, let's say, multiple sort of skill sets and considerations. So here we have on the slide an example of a content hub, and this is the one that I mentioned that really gave rise to the agency. It's more than 4 years old now. It started in Brazil, but it now exists in 10 markets, and it's around 70% driven by organic search. That's where the sessions come from. And just to give you an interesting statistic, it's grown enormously this year during the crisis period. One, because the hair topic has been very popular in lockdown. You know, people's hair care and wellness of hair has been a big topic, but the platform has grown massively over and above the background user trend. And that's because over 3 or 4 years, it's built up a huge legacy of content, which was there, ready and waiting for a crisis like this. You know, even though certain topics might have generated minimal traffic last year, the ecosystem has changed, and suddenly those topics are popular. And we have URLs that are 1, 2, 3, 4 years old that talk to that. So building up, I would say, a sort of legacy set of URLs, doing a gap analysis, progressively filling in your taxonomy within your category does pay off in the long term. There's only around 3% of traffic comes from paid media, and that is highly selective, and typically it's targeted at say low transactional phrases. Therefore, the cost per click is much lower than you'd pay for if you were buying, you know, purchase-related terminology. So it's an incredibly efficient way to capture, you know, what's important within your sales funnel.
Just really quickly, Jonathan, could we check that you're using the microphone on your earphones and not another microphone, just to make sure, because we've got a little bit of a sound cut off, and some people are suggesting it might be your shirt. I think it's your connection, which is why you're now moving to a more appropriate place in your house. And I think we can realize now that Jonathan's using his cell phone, and where you are in the house with the cell phone makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it, Jonathan?
Yes, I think hopefully that's going to improve slightly. Yeah, I did have
that
a technical...
sounds 100% better.
I had a technical meltdown earlier in the week, which is why I'm on my phone.
Right, Jonathan, nicely installed on your sofa. Let's continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic. So that's all things here. Let's go to the next one. So this is just a sort of that's the one. So this is just a sort of background slide. I think it's important to understand how ecosystems are changing, digital ecosystems are changing. You know, we've gone from communicating to the masses to a few years ago to more of a sort of, I would call it tribes or groupings. Now we're into the arena of near one-on-one communications. So your keyword strategy needs to actually map all the searches that are going on in a particular category. You need to get inside the minds of your consumers to understand when they're searching, why they're searching, what is it they're searching for, what are these different needs at a different time of the day even, and based on gender, etc. And indeed, these needs might change at different parts of the year. And indeed, as we've seen in 2020, they might change based on factors you'd never even considered, like the COVID crisis, for instance. And that's massively challenging to do that at scale, because again, you will look at different markets and you have to ask yourself the question, do you have to write unique content for every single country, or are there more efficient ways to do it? So in some instances, there's almost an 80-20 rule in that you can have 80% global content, 20% localized. And if you can do those proportions, it becomes incredibly efficient to scale content in that way. Some content types that doesn't lend itself to. The key part of our work is understanding, when you can have those kind of efficiency ratios and when you can't.
We've lost you, Jonathan. You've muted yourself, unfortunately. We're looking at passions and needs. You're still muted. So
here we go.
There we go. We're back.
I'm back. That's right. So another aspect of the content scale is really understanding what you're talking to. Is it needs-based content? Are you answering something in a question that someone has in the moment? And in that instance, having a position 0 result may be the ideal way to capture that share of voice. And it could be that person comes to your site, spends a few minutes on the site, has the question answered, you expose them to your brand messages and your product, and off they go. And you don't see them until they have a need in the future. And a lot of content hubs superficially will deliver that kind of needs-based traffic at very high levels. The trick is going to be, how do you sustain that relationship with the user? Can you get them to sign up to some regular communication? Or once they're on the site, can you entice them with a piece of content that convinces them to hang around and read more content, even though their immediate need has been answered? So those are some of the challenges there. Then there's passions. So needs tend to be evergreen, I would say. They're always around, they have sustainable traffic volumes, whereas passions can be driven by changes in user behavior, seasonal changes, etc. Hang on a second, I just need to close the door because there's...
Oh, right, we've lost Jonathan very briefly there. Passions, I mean, I have passions. I love music, but at different times, I'm going to be really into different types of music. And right now, during the COVID, I've been listening to lots of 80s music. Sorry, while you were away, Jonathan, I was talking about music and our musical tastes, which are pretty appalling. So passions don't necessarily rhyme with logic.
They don't, and sometimes they're quite difficult to predict. So we'll all know that social listening is great for social platforms, but it often doesn't translate into search volumes. So the trick here is to understand when there are long-term changes in user behavior, which you can kind of predict, but might come around once a year or a few times a year, like Halloween, or if it's crisis related, you just need to watch those trends starting to take off. You can't predict trends in SEO because that's kind of not a thing, but you can ride on trends as they start to happen. So I'd say this sort of passion-based content is actually underpinned by a lot of data and research. What it also means is that when you have a content calendar, you're mostly going to be populating it, probably sort of 80–90% of your content calendar is going to be based on your long-term taxonomy and on your big keyword gap analysis and evergreen topics. But you need to create some kind of flexibility in there so that sort of say 10 to 15% of your content output at most is much more reactive and can change very quickly to jump on trends as they happen. Another interesting point here about planning content is it's no good jumping on a trend if everyone else has done the same. So you need to identify, trending content with high volumes that has relatively low competition, then you can really kind of cash in. So in the beauty space, there's no good sort of jumping on a theme if Cosmo and Glamour and everybody else have got there first. You need to get in ahead of them and sort of capture that SERP before anybody else. Another challenge is data. So you'll all be familiar with this. Fortunately, Semrush helps a lot in this regard and helps you to prioritize keywords and content and do keyword discovery at scale. And I should, point out here that the tool of choice for our writing teams, especially if they're doing on the fly SERP analysis and then trying to relate it back to their original keyword research, Semrush is something that's the heart of our content production processes, as you'd expect. But there's a wealth of data out there, and as you can get information from GA and Search Console and all these other places, but as your content hub grows, you may well start to write content on the same topic. You may well start to get content cannibalization, duplication, and start to see a tailing off of performance as a result. And it's difficult from all the suites of tools that you may have to get clear answers on how you manage a very large content footprint. And it may be quite difficult to get clear answers about what you should be prioritizing for your forward-looking content calendars. And that, I think, is where experienced expertise comes in, plus a lot of planning and practice, because there's no tool in the world that is going to give you all the answers you need to producing this kind of content at scale, especially if that's over multi-market, multi-language sort of scenarios. Also content and the sales funnel. I mean, this is a critical one when we're talking about return on investment, because if you don't know how your client is seeking to measure results and what success feels like to them, you won't be able to create content that sort of populates your site to meet that. And here are 4 fairly sort of common phases within a sales funnel, and you will potentially need content that talks to all of these phases. You might also need different calls to action and different incentives at every phase of that sales funnel. So we're looking here at things like emotional. So we mentioned passions versus needs. So emotional or sort of trending content is one, typically not evergreen though. So that could be sort of more news-based. If that news-based content is a key part of your output, then you'll need to create almost like a newsroom approach. Your content team may need to sit down with your SEO experts, not just sort of monthly, but actually weekly or even daily, depending on the sort of scale of your industry. Then we have impulse-based. This is especially important for categories that are highly seasonal. If, for instance, you're in the drinks industry or other FMCG categories, then you may have extreme, seasonal behaviors that you need to tap into. Things like insurance also have high seasonality. Gyms and fitness and health, as we all know, will have huge peaks in January and then tail off for the rest of the year as people don't follow through on their January promises. But the pattern of seasonality is different in every industry. As I say earlier, though, the core of your content output is almost certainly going to focus on this intent-driven, always-on kind of content. And then there's a question of brand. Well, most brands ideally would rank #1 for all the keywords that contain their brand terms. We know in reality that's not the case. So part of a content calendar output will potentially look at how you capture all of the brand related phrases, product names, product brands, or even campaign strap lines. We need to make sure that you're not having to pay paid media in order to capture those. We want to make sure your content hub easily catches those. And of course, the conversion rates are often much higher off brand related terms anyway. So we want to make sure that that is a core as an early priority of any kind of content work. So this is a nice one here to talk about what audiences actually expect from content. And it's all very well saying things like you need to produce the right content at the right time, etc. But actually doing it is much more challenging. But users will expect this. If your content isn't delivered on the right device, in the right format and the right tone, then it simply, you may get them to site, but they will not spend long on your site or on your content, not enough time to actually convert, not enough time to have strong user engagement metrics. And we know that that is a minor signal in Google at the moment, but moving forward, user experience metrics are going to be a much, much stronger signal, we believe, to Google's algorithm. So if you combine UX metrics with technical SEO, site speed, and so on, there's quite a high bar that your content platforms need to jump through in order to perform. We also think your content needs to be entertaining and informative, rather than kind of robotic and sterile, which some SEO-driven content is. It's got to be topical, trending, fresh, and engaging. And we believe in the future, Google's algorithm is going to penalize content that doesn't actually fulfill those criteria. You'll potentially need to be findable across platforms, because cross-device, cross-platform journeys are something that Google is going to have a deep understanding of. It's going to know when you're on different devices and that it's you and what your overall interests are when you're on different platforms and devices. We also haven't included it in here, but we also believe that voice search and the sort of semantic AI that Google's developed for that is going to be ported over into more traditional desktop search, and that will have a huge impact. Google will really have a much deeper understanding of user intent in future, and that will dramatically impact what kind of sites get ranked in the SERP compared to today's results. You also need to be ubiquitous and authoritative. We all know where authority comes in. Backlinks are a key sort of part of that as well. I think that's some of the sort of key criteria.
Right, yeah. I mean, that is kind of the idea, and I love the idea of brand. It's saying, I need my brand to be recognized, but also ubiquitous at the moment of that need. And we had Hannah Campo asking, how can you convince somebody and your audience that their wants are actually needs? I mean, that's kind of like pushy salesmanship, isn't it? I mean, I would say we recognize as human beings a difference between want and a need, but is that necessarily true?
It's not, and it's a very fine line, actually. What we find, and this is an interesting question when it comes to how you're going to create that content. So if you're going to put that content on your brand site, it's very difficult to convince people that their needs or wants. But if you're a large company with multiple brands, you could create a non-brand hub or a brand agnostic hub where you expose multiple products in a given category to the user, and that creates the impression of authenticity. You're still dealing with a limited ecosystem, and you're still selling to them, but you're managing to convince them that it feels much more natural. Obviously, if you're a single product or a single category or a single brand company, that's going to be quite challenging to create that authoritative voice and environment if you're having to do it all on your existing .com. Right. So many content hubs are actually created on separate domains, sometimes brand new domains. And in certain industries, the level of legal compliance and the restrictions are such that you can't behave like a publisher if you're doing it within your existing .com environment. So this is one of the big questions about content is, do you stick with your current site and just tack a blog onto it? Or do you create a brand new hub and have a much more adventurous, creative, flexible methodology?
Brilliant. Okay, wonderful. And we have a quick question from Justin Hill, who's talking about data-driven. I mean, you were talking about not making your content mechanical. And the problem with data-driven content, which a lot of SEOs do, I think, is that it tends to be mechanical, tends to be formatted, and tends not to be engaging. And Justin, I think, is justifiably worried that his content creation system is going to lack the human element. Is that anything he can deal with?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really huge challenge. I mean, the first thing you do is to do your keyword research. So you understand what users are actually interested in. Then you look at what kind of sites are being served in the position 0 and in other top SERPs. So the likelihood is that somebody out there has kind of cracked the formula and are doing rather well. In certain sectors, WikiHow and sites like that tend to perform a lot better than brands that try to be helpful, as it were. So it's worth seeing, what the leading sites are doing and whether you can actually emulate that. But when it comes to the articles themselves, the chap asking the question may well have a problem that maybe his article's too short. Maybe it's not ambitious enough. So, for instance, some of the articles we create on All Things Hair Hub, some of them will have 50 images or 100 images and multiple subsections. We would only do that if the SERP tells us that's what's required, and top ranking competitors are doing the same. So sometimes you can get away with one image and no video. Sometimes you will need some kind of video asset and some kind of structured subsections. Sometimes 500 words will be enough to dominate the SERP. Sometimes you'll need multiple articles, and the I would say the article at the top of your hierarchy might need to be 1,000 words in length. So the content output needs to be driven by the data and the insights you get from what's going on in the market.
Which neatly answers Alex's question, which is what's the best way to find out what is the right way to deliver your content based on keyword topic. And in fact, it's analyze the SERP, see what's ranking, see what is there and what kind of format and what platforms you should be using if you want to rank. Is that fair comment?
It is, yeah. Start with the data, and Semrush has pretty much all the data you need in order to answer those questions. I mean, no SEO tool will package it all up and create a content brief and press a button and off you go. But most of the data you need will be in a tool like Semrush. And if you can combine that with your industry expertise, then you'll be well on the way to be able to plan that content.
Brilliant. Which, if I've understood correctly, is the next part, or coming on to the next part of the presentation. So back to the presentation. We're looking at content strategy. I have there you go. I'll leave it to you again.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. So this is a very simplified, as you'd expect, kind of overview of some of the considerations that we put into a content strategy. This one, of course, is relating to sort of FMCG. In this case, it's a sort of hair category. And we start off with, we call it vision. I think that's sort of quite a grand phrase there. It's really starting off with what does the client want to achieve? Is it capturing cookies? Is it user signups? Or is it just pure weight of traffic and then engaging them with your brand messages once they're on the site? So understanding that vision is critical. Then how are you going to achieve it through content? And what's the tone and structure of your site going to be? Is it going to be on your brand.com? Is it going to be a separate hub? If it's a separate hub, how big is it going to be? How big is it going to become? And what is the role of that hub in your consumer's life? It's no good coming at this with a brand mentality and thinking people are naturally going to be interested in your brand or in your brand messages. No one gives a damn. I mean, to be frank. So you need to find out what your users are genuinely interested in order to engage them with that. Next, as we go down the tree, we need to look at the proportions of content. So I sort of talked earlier about evergreen being a key part of it, and it can be anything from 70 to 90% of your content output. It will typically be driven by evergreen SEO considerations. Again, I'm not saying that the content is then dry and dull. It still has to be compelling, but the raison d'etre for picking certain topics at certain times is all based on SEO data. Potentially, if you're dealing with multiple markets, 70% of that might well be global themes, 20% might be sort of localized and much more reactive. So you can get your cues or ideas from, say, what's happening in social. It may be that you know, there's things going on in one market, but not in others. So you know, it could be Chinese New Year in Asia, which is going to be much bigger than it is, say, in the UK. And then lastly, I think we mentioned earlier, we reserve about 10% of our content output that's really dedicated to reacting to what's going on, to trending stuff. Now, often when you work with a brand, they will try to monopolize this with things that they care about and that they think their users care about. Rarely does that drive much traffic. So we try to make sure that that 10% of that sort of localized reactive content still taps into some kind of search logic and search opportunity. If the brand is going to dictate, you know, let's say 10 to 15% of your content and insist that it's not performance related directly in terms of, you know, getting rankings in the SERP, then we would still try to make that content relevant for digital PR and outreach. I mean, it's my view that 100% of your content should be, you know, delivering on some kind of performance agenda. That doesn't necessarily mean it's all about just, you know, ranking in the SERP. Backlinks are a critical part of how you activate your content and get it to rank highly. So let's say putting aside 5 to 10% of your content for digital PR purposes, I think is a sort of reasonable proportion.
Right. Sorry, just to interrupt really quickly, I think that's a brilliant point. I mean, I work with clients like you do, and I find a lot of them just talk about what they feel they want to talk about. And it's lovely to see that can be 10%, guys. The rest of it has to serve your audience. And that's going to be my next argument next time I have to talk to a client about that and they won't listen to me. I'll say, Jonathan Fink says so. And there will be no comeback.
That it works even, so...
Brilliant. Right, back to the screen. Sorry, I interrupted because I was terribly pleased that you've given me some ammunition. The discovery process.
And I take your point. It is very, very difficult to prove ROI on link building. I mean, beyond telling a client that that's what their competitors are doing, beyond telling them that the top ranked sites have X number of links of certain quality and they have to do it because I told you so. It's very difficult to demonstrate ROI on link building, but I would also argue it's an essential part of any content creation strategy. You know, unless you're a brand that has enormous link equity already. So, for instance, you'll have seen earlier that you know, in the past, I worked with people like Waitrose and Argos. Now they have extraordinary brand link equity, so you don't actually have to do any active link building. Your content will activate, as it were, without you having to worry too much about the links or even the internal link structure, because it's all there. Most brands do need to worry about internal linking structure and their external linking equity. So we got a little bit here on the discovery process. So really, this is a basic 3-stage process. And we're going back here to the foundations of keyword discovery to create your content hub. You know, discovery is important. We've got primarily Semrush here. That's the core tool we'd use. But there's other stuff people will have seen and be familiar with. You know, Answer the Public, etc., which is a great tool. Ahrefs, more of a backlink tool, but there's some keyword stuff in there. People have their own favorite tools. But I would say Semrush gives you absolutely everything you need to create the basis. And it's a great way, of course, to get your monthly search volume data. Keyword Planner for Google is become quite, I would say, tricky to use these days. And a lot of the data is sampled. So Semrush is a fantastic way to get that search volume data much more quickly and easily. So we've got Semrush in here. Keyword Planner is great if you want to have, you know, the last 12 months or the last 2 years of data. But again, Semrush is the hassle-free way of getting that. There are other tools like Systrix, but I would say they're more about benchmarking you within the industry, and perhaps moving forward, looking at your sort of performance benchmarking. I'd have to say that for most of my clients, I tend to use several ways to benchmark performance, not a single tool. So we'd use Semrush to sort of show rankings and change in rankings, CTR, traffic, but we'd also show other metrics there, increase in impressions, impression share, and Systrix has a visibility score, which is very similar to, say, that, and other proprietary tools do the same. So I would tend to have several different measures of performance that I share with clients for these content hubs. So data is a critical part of underpinning a strategy. But as I mentioned earlier, all the data in the world is not a strategy. So the last part of this is actually analysis of that data, which then becomes the foundation of your strategy and the foundation of your content calendar and content creation process. And that, in a nutshell, it's not everything, but it's the bare bones of the process that we adopt. So why is this important? I think it's really because in order to get good ROI from content, you absolutely have to maximize the value and impact you get from your assets. That will mean understanding how much of your assets get localized and how much are global. It's about understanding whether you can do minimal changes to the text asset and then perhaps produce local images to get that localized feel. There are many ways to sort of cut and dice this. But from the data, from the planning process, we need to answer several critical questions in order to make content production cost effective. So how much content do you need? What's the frequency and in what formats? We need to understand what the length and structure of the content is, the phasing, seasonality, and indeed the longevity of that. Are you going to have to carry on the same high output in year 2 as you did in year 1? Typically not. Typically there are efficiencies in year 2, and you don't need to output the same number of articles. How do you align that content with your sales funnel? How do you align it with your audience and the various segments that exist there? And if those segments aren't clear, how can you use content to actually help you define what those segments are in the ways they interact with your content? So that's pretty critical as it evolves. And then, of course, there's competitive intensity, and that may well have a huge influence on what you write about and when, and what your prioritization of different content themes is. From that, we do opportunity modeling, localization potential, and the critical one for clients is predictive analysis, telling them how long it will take to get their content into SERPs and how much traffic they can expect from it. Device and tone has become important, then factoring in brand objectives, and then lastly, engagement and loyalty, which isn't typically an SEO criteria, but we believe is becoming one as user engagement becomes much more of a thing. So I think this slide is supposed to build in terms of pretty pictures. There we go.
Oh, the lovely pictures. Yes, I'm sorry. I thought I'd switch, but I hadn't.
I mean, yeah, this is just trying to say here that there's different t-shirt sizes, and if you create your content in a one-size-fits-all approach, it really is not going to work, and it's not going to drive engagement either.
Brilliant. Okay, so you need to make sure that your content conforms, adapts itself to the products themselves and to your audience and their needs and their wants, as we mentioned earlier on, and even the locality.
And especially the locality, and that counts for text content, but also visuals as well. So you might be able to produce, say, a beauty article and make it broadly fit multiple markets. Right. But if your images show people with different skin color, face types, it's just not going to be engaging for your local audience. And that cuts across many, many categories and the sort of types of models that may be used either in product shots or portrait shots. So that localization cuts across several different themes.
Okay, so we have a puzzle.
Here's a puzzle, yes. So we've mentioned a few of these things, but they primarily, I would say, taxonomy underpins most decisions. and then how you interpret that and turn it into strategy. But you can see there's loads of other stuff to consider along the way, from content, video assets, infographics, UX, localization, images, analytics, how you measure all of this stuff, even how, let's say, you may have A/B testing could be a crucial thing, and in the world of site speed and so on, you need to choose the right analytics packages and even the right CMS and hosting packages in order to make your platform work. And that goes right down to the level of potentially having, say, caching solutions like Akamai and caching policies in countries. So it's a curious blend of art and science, I would say, to get the right content, but give it the right sort of criteria and put it on the right platform that would allow it to achieve its potential.
Brilliant stuff. So we're about to get into lots of numbers. I cheated and looked ahead. Lots of numbers, please.
Spoilers.
Oh no,
So,
there's just so many numbers, and I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, now we're getting to the heart of it. Is we've talked about content. Everybody talks about content. We tend to talk about it in a kind of very fluffy manner where we don't really have a measurable basis on which we can work. And I have a lot of problems with my clients, and when I'm talking to people in general, and actually having a method or a methodology to measure it is going to be phenomenally interesting. And from what I can see from the slides that are coming up, we've got measurability through and through. I think we've temporarily lost Jonathan there.
I'm back.
You're back, right. So, Jonathan, you're going to explain these numbers because I can see hundreds of numbers and graphs and red things and blue things, and I'm really intrigued to know what it all means.
So what we're trying to do is to create some element of predictability in terms of the strategy that we're proposing. And at its basic level, that can be done on traffic simply. So, you're ranking in a certain position, that's yielding a certain amount of traffic, and this is how it might go up over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And then we can also say, and what is the split going to be between brand traffic and generic keywords. Right. So that stuff's relatively easy, I would say. And if you take into account a number of criteria, including, their current link authority, domain authority, all these kind of factors, you can come up with a reasonably accurate prediction of where their ranking's going to go. But that might not tell you anything about what the bottom line is, about what that's going to actually deliver to the brand in terms of revenue. So this example here shows how you can go further than the typical sort of uplift modeling. And you could even factor in things like, average number of units sold, what the average value of a particular unit or product is within a given category. Let's say if it's a fridge, it's going to be a high margin, but there's going to be less frequent purchases, etc. So you can actually put in sort of detailed transactional information into your uplift modeling. And I would say, if that data is available, then it adds significant value into the content calendar and how you prioritize doing different things at different times of the year.
Yeah, I notice you're focusing on potential lost traffic, which is an interesting way of looking at it, saying how much are we not getting that we could otherwise be getting, which is putting the fear into the boss, isn't it?
It is. I mean, convincing brands to take the leap and invest in content is always a bit carrot and stick. And I also find that if you talk in terms of share of voice, what competitors are doing, it just creates, most brands really care about beating their competitors, or they'll always have one nemesis that they want to get one up over. So if you can bring the figures to life by, giving them a competitive scenario that by doing X, Y, and Z, they're going to, knock Joe Rodcorp off the number one slot or take a big slice of their share of voice, that just means an awful lot more, and it gives you a much more robust benchmark to measure your success against.
Right. Okay. Brilliant stuff. Are we now into key metrics and ROI
We are. I
calculation?
think we're almost at the. I don't remember how many slides we got left actually, but I think we're close to the end of them.
Yeah. All I'm doing there, Jonathan, is proving I can read.
It's a good skill to have. It definitely is.
Definitely helpful.
So this is a very simple version, but again, investing in content is a risk because it doesn't pay off overnight. It takes time to pay off. And paid media is like a tap, isn't it? You switch it on, there it is, it's very visible and controllable. The trouble is when you switch that tap off, it's gone. So what we try to do is to show that investment in content doesn't just pay off after a year or 2 years, but actually the critical point at which you get a higher ROI from content often will come in month 6, 7, or 8, depending on the rate of paid search or paid media in your industry. If it's a higher rate of paid media, then content will tend to pay off by month 4, 5, and 6. If it's a much lower cost per click in your industry, then it might take a little bit longer to achieve positive ROI based on whatever your conversion metric is. But what's absolutely assured is if you look over a 12-month period, you will almost always see a positive ROI on content compared to the paid media equivalent. And then that ROI escalates in year 2 because turn off your paid media, it's gone. You're generating no leads. Whereas a piece of content that we created, say, on one of our sites 3 years ago, that is still generating traffic now, 3 years later. Ideally, we would have refreshed that content and revisited it a number of times. But the fact is that a content asset can deliver extreme the short, medium, and long term.
Yeah, I mean, I love the thing at the bottom where on the left for the first 6 months we've got red, and then it's blue, and then you're saying, and after that it's all in French we say bénéfice. It's all positive for us, and it's all free. And that first 6 months is
yeah.
It's all jam, brilliant. But that first 6 month period is where brands are most frightened. They're pushing this money in, and they're saying we're not getting a return. And if you present it to them by saying that first 6 months is red, and it will only become blue after, like as you said, it could be 4 months, could be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But certainly once it starts being blue, it will continue to be blue for years to come.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and your priorities may change, but that content will still deliver. And even on the content hubs we run, some of those URLs may have been created 3 or 4 years ago. We may have rewritten that article several times since in its entirety, but the fact is the URL itself is mature. It's associated with the same topic, but we've transformed that content, the quality of that content, and the relevance over the years, and probably refreshed the image set several times over in that 3 to 4 year lifespan.
Really interestingly, I talked to Danny Goodwin on my podcast a few weeks ago, in fact, and he was saying that they went through the entire Search Engine Journal site and refreshed the content, and it made a phenomenal difference. It was an amazing piece of SEO that they did that drove phenomenal amounts of traffic with existing content that had already paid for itself and just drove more and more traffic.
I can absolutely believe that. And, I think it depends on the frequency and your resources, of course. But I also spoke to somebody who works on a major sort of fashion publication, which partly driven by brand, but also they're very good at SEO. And she said that they revisit their top performing 10% of their URL footprint, not just annually, but weekly. Every week they revisit their top 10% of performing content, which is extraordinary. And that apparently pays huge dividends. So That's not
Well,
something I've tried on the
well,
project.
I suppose it depends on the industry. I mean, if you're in the fashion industry, things change very quickly. So
Yes.
weekly would seem to be reasonable.
Yeah.
In the SEO industry, things, obviously new things come up, but the fundamentals don't change that often. So probably weekly is going to be too much. But the idea of saying, what's my 10% of content? I need to focus on that and keep updating it to make sure, whatever the time frame within my industry, that I keep it up to date within a reasonable time frame for my industry. I think that's brilliant, wonderful stuff.
And I think the problem that most e-commerce sites have is that refreshing for them means changing their stock, which means that at any one time, at several points in the year, they might lose 20, 30, 40, 50% of the URLs, and they just destroy them. They literally, redirect them if they're doing the right thing, and they have a bunch of new URLs with new product. And it's essentially the similar kind of stuff, or it'll come round again in 9 months' time, but they're constantly trashing their URLs and creating new ones.
And in fact, an e-commerce store would do well to think, well, how can I give my URLs these generic structures that allows me to just replace old content? Oh, that's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing.
Or rather than relying on categories that change, or that reflect their catalog taxonomy, or relying on individual product pages, they could actually put that into user guides, tutorials, and persistent URLs that become the new sort of landing page or hub for a particular category or product type.
Brilliant stuff. Wonderful. Now, back to the presentation, which is almost over. One last slide. It's the content ROI calculator, which is probably the crux of the whole thing.
It is. And this is just a visualization of what I mentioned before, which is that it does take a number of months for the return on investment, for the cost per lead or the cost per KPI measure to come down. But after you've crossed that threshold, you can see paid media doesn't change. I mean, in reality, you might be able to make your campaign a little bit more efficient, but that's wiped out by the inflationary nature of paid media. And we know that with the changes to cookie policies coming up in 2022, the inflationary nature of paid media, and especially Google, programmatic display and PPC, the prices are going to be going up. As an auction, people are going to be moving off potentially third-party platforms and engines, aggregation engines, into the Google platform, which will still retain some of the retargeting and remarketing capability. So yes, you can be efficient in paid media, but it doesn't really, cost per lead is fairly consistent, possibly even going up over time. Whereas the ROI on content, just as you see, it's exponentially downwards, because as you add to your content footprint, the yield of each piece of content gets higher and higher over time, and reduces the cost, because the asset, as you said earlier, it's produced. You don't have to invest tons of money. You might just need to just give it a little bit of a refresh and a tweak every now and then.
Brilliant stuff. Absolutely wonderful. So in fact, we have one last slide. Being obsessive about tech and content delivers results in search. I'd forgotten about that, and the reason I'd forgotten about it, if we can show it on the screen, is it says all things hair, which is one thing that just doesn't apply to me at all.
I know more about hair than I ought to now, having worked on this project. But it's very, very quickly, it tells an interesting story. Towards the right-hand side, you'll see an upward curve, and that increase was very much driven by technical SEO, front-end, back-end transformation of the site, rewriting the content, deduping the content, huge, I would say, root and branch, but getting all the SEO basics ticked, and a huge increase in site speed. So I know people kind of malign technical SEO and say that it doesn't necessarily deliver or hold you back. They're not true on large content hubs. You have to have seamless tech SEO. And this is the demonstration that when you get all those fundamentals right, you can have a huge traffic uplift potential. Then the second curve is the interesting one. I mean, that is the COVID curve. And you can see here that traffic has, well, more than doubled. Traffic has trebled during the COVID crisis. But when we looked at the background user trends, they hadn't trebled in the hair category. They'd no more than doubled. So there's a huge uplift here, which can't be explained just by looking at background user trend. And when we dig into the data, it's because we have 3-4 years of legacy content on every single theme under the sun. Right. So even if that content, some of it wasn't that popular last year because it wasn't relevant to users, suddenly their lives change and we're ready and waiting. It's like, it's like the gene pool when the asteroid hits. Dinosaurs don't survive, but mammals do quite well. When the environment changes, it helps to have content that talks to that topic. Because if you're just producing that content in reaction to the COVID crisis, then you're not going to get there. You're not going to see that.
Too late.
Yeah, it's too late.
I think one last point on this is I find that when I look at the content that we could create, it becomes suddenly very overwhelming, and we have to remember that we create content over a long period of time, and it builds up faster than we think. We think, oh, I want it all right now, but actually, if you just get on with it bit by bit, it's the slowly gets the monkey, or the tortoise and the hare. Yeah. We need to accept that we are tortoises, and that the tortoise will win 3 years down the line.
Absolutely. If you have a vision and you have sort of passion to do it and commitment, and you've got the right data and tools to support you, then it's all certainly doable. But you need to have that realistic assessment of what's achievable with the resources that you have at your disposal.
Sure, right, brilliant stuff. So if we can just go back to the screen, we can show Jonathan his wonderful photograph and his GPC logo, which is absolutely wonderful. I think that's very important because then we remember him and GPC, and we can say thank you to Greenpark Content and Semrush, in fact, for hosting this. Can we have one question? I mean, we've overrun very slightly, but Abby asked a question that I'm incredibly intrigued by. Content writing eventually translating into actual sales is the question. How far is video content ahead, if it is, compared to written content for actually driving sales? Is video content better than written content today?
It's not. I don't think you can compare it. It's almost like apples and oranges. So there may be some lifestyle businesses, I know that for a fact, which drive a higher conversion rate through social channels. If you can, I think the trick there is to not bounce users around between platforms. So if you're creating video content and you're expecting them to make an inquiry on your .com, you've got a problem, and vice versa. So if video is the thing that drives conversion, then you need to make sure you've created the ecosystem. Now, either it's an app that serves that video to the user, or it's a video library on your .com, or it's a YouTube environment. But whatever you're doing, you need to make sure that that sales funnel is consistent within the platform that you've chosen. And GPC has some really good examples of where we've actually created video platforms, and that is the entire content piece. It's not actually SEO play at all. But that really depends on the audience. So for instance, training does really well there. So if you've got an audience that are time limited and you want to deliver really high level expertise to them in a really consumable fashion, then video is fantastic, and it might be worth building some kind of ecosystem to serve that video and manage them. But if your inquiry conversion process, or indeed your purchase takes place on your domain, then video is probably going to be of limited or ancillary benefit. If you are doing lots of how-tos and tutorials, and that's part of your sales funnel, then video plays a role, but just in padding the content out and getting them through your sales funnel. If you want your inquiries and sales on your .com, then it's really going to be primarily text-based articles supported by video and images.
Right. So whatever content you're creating, it's all about creating the environment, or having the environment that can contain and host that content so that it's useful and helpful to your audience to push them towards that conversion. I think that's a really lovely way to finish it, Jonathan. That was an absolutely awesome presentation. Some great questions from the public. Please do remember you can watch it back afterwards. No need to worry about anything you've forgotten. You can just watch the whole thing again. Big thank you to Jonathan.
And do get in touch if you have any questions.
Very
Happy
good point.
to share the expertise.
Right, thank you to Jonathan. Get in contact with him if you need to. Greenparkcontent.com. And he's jonathan.fink@greenparkcontent.com. We had the slide there, but we can't see it on screen. Thank you to Semrush for organizing this. Perhaps we can show that screen just before we cut off, so that people can contact Jonathan if they need to or if they want to, if they've got questions that weren't answered today. Jonathan.fink@greenparkcontent.com. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Jason. Fantastic hosting.
Brett, I loved it. Absolutely loved your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.